How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, giving you guys your September 2019 horoscope for Gemini, Sun, and Rising. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. We are starting September off with Mars conjoining the Sun in Virgo. Now, Mars is the planet of our action and our drive, our intentions, and where we're feeling energized. Mars is a malefic planet, so it does bring some problems like, anger and frustration and fights. But while Mars is in the sign of Virgo, it's more focused on the specifics and on the details and wanting to get its ducks lined up in a row. Now, when Mars conjoins the Sun, this is when Mars is kind of getting purified by fire in a sense. And Mars's energy is kind of like renewed, and you could feel a little bit more decisive with what you're doing, feel a little bit more clear with what your plan of action is. And that's important because this is happening in your fourth house. Now, the fourth house is all about your family, your home life, your private life, where you live. That includes roommates if you're living in that type of situation. As Mars conjoins the Sun, this is kind of like figuring out a little bit more of where you want to dial yourself in and where you want to direct your energy and refreshing that a little bit more. And so while this is in your fourth house, this is kind of refreshing where your action is kind of oriented in when it comes to your living situation, even just centering yourself or, dealing with your parents. And then on September 3rd is when Mercury is going to conjoin the Sun. And this is just a little bit more important than Mars conjoining the Sun because Mercury is in its home sign of Virgo. It's its domicile where Mercury can be, very mercurial. The way that we communicate, we speak, we vocalize, our ideas are a little bit more concise and clear and have more specific definitions. But as Mercury conjoins the Sun in Virgo, this is the same idea of it kind of getting purified by fire in a sense, ideas starting to come through more, the light bulb kind of clicking. And with Mercury ruling, menial things like communication and paperwork and organizing, with this happening in your fourth house, after you have that, energy switch of where to focus you direct your energy, Mercury conjoining the Sun is getting the mental clarity and the mental game plan ready so you can start directing more of that energy in that place. But then on September 4th, September 7th, and September 10th, that's when we're going to have Venus oppose Neptune, Mercury oppose Neptune, and the Sun oppose Neptune. And I want to kind of take this triad and put it into one thing because while Venus is in Virgo, Venus is the planet of love and relationships and value, and she wants to express those things through indulgence and, working together with other people and bringing gifts to you. Now, Venus is in its sign of fall in Virgo, where it's not operating as well. And the analogy I've been making for my horoscopes has been, you can kind of get analysis paralysis when Venus is wanting to beautify every single little tiny detail and subject, but when you have to beautify and put all of this emphasis and value into all these tiny details, it can be very overwhelming and you can tend to forget some of the more important ones. And so while Venus is going through that, she's going through your fourth house of your family and your home life. So it's like, where am I really placing my value? I see the value in these things. Where do I need to let go of it more? Or where do I need to be more decisive with it? As Venus opposes Neptune, Neptune's in your 10th house. And, the 10th house is your career, your public vocation, how the people see you. It's just bigger life stuff. It's at the top of the sky where everyone can see it. And with Neptune being up there, Neptune's a slow-moving planet, so it's not like it's super in your face, but there's this cloud of illusion and fog over this area at this moment, and you can kind of get lost in a dualistic, perception of things. But while Venus opposes Neptune, this is getting a little bit more clearer on where you need to root yourself and where your foundation is in your living situation to where it can start, your career life and whatever's going up in the sky gets a little bit more less foggy and a little bit more clear and defined. Now, after Venus, opposes Neptune, that's like a value shift of seeing where to place your value in the specific things and not just getting lost and confused and overwhelmed with everything. When Mercury opposes Neptune, this is having the mental shift. While Mercury is in Virgo, it's doing pretty well. It is combust, which means it's underneath the beams of the sun, so it's, burning up. It's a little bit hard to see. But while Mercury's in Virgo, it's clear, it's concise, it's black and white, it's easy to read, and there's no real, challenging that. But while Mercury opposes Neptune and Mercury's, getting more neat and tidy around your fourth house stuff, this is again kind of alleviating a little bit more of that confusion that you can be having in this 10th house sphere. But after we have this value shift with Venus opposing Neptune, this mental shift with Mercury opposing Neptune, then we have the Sun opposing Neptune, which is kind of a little bit of a different story. A good way I've been kind of expressing this is while we have that value shift, that mental shift, the Sun opposing Neptune is kind of like seeing that play out in practice and kind of seeing the results of those shifts. Now, as the Sun opposes Neptune, this is when technically we're as close to Neptune as we're going to get through our orbit around the Sun. And Neptune, is about fog, is about illusion, duality, mysticism, and we have the Sun right here basically opposite of it. An analogy I've been using is kind of like, if you're driving in the fog and you turn on your brights, the fog just gets worse and the vision gets harder to see. So while the Sun's opposing Virgo, you may have while the Sun's opposing Neptune, you may have this, confusion area of like, there's a lot of light coming from this area, but it's making this area a little bit more foggy, a little bit more elusive. I think this is going to be a good time after Venus opposes Neptune, Mercury opposes Neptune, and the Sun, just to kind of realize a little bit more of what can you see now and where do you need to focus on that rather than bringing the attention to stuff that you can't foresee and stuff that is behind the fog that you're just not going to be able to see until you either get through the fog or it lifts up. Then on September 13th is when Mercury is going to conjoin Venus while it's in Virgo. And this is pretty nice because Venus, like we said earlier, is kind of getting a little bit overwhelmed with the details and kind of putting too much emphasis on it. Mercury's kind of coming in to save the day to kind of handle all of the minuscule, tiny details that Venus is kind of having trouble with. But Mercury conjoining Venus is when Mercury's kind of expressing the message of Venus. And Venus, again, is, value. What are you enjoying? What's actually giving your heart some fulfillment right now? And Mercury conjoining Venus is like, hey, these specific details that I'm focusing on, these tiny things that I want that are going to make me more comfortable in my living situation, in my home life, are important. And this is just more of the realization of where your mind and your ideas and your thoughts are more aligned with your values at this time. Also on September 13th, though, is when we're having the full moon in Pisces. Now, while Mercury's conjoining Venus in Virgo, which is nice, like, there's some clarity over this situation, this full moon is, when it's a full moon, you have both of the luminaries lit up, so the axis and everything's there for you to see. While the full moon is in Pisces, this is about being a little bit more open to what things can look like. Pisces is about mixing our emotions with logic and blending them together and coming up with our own ideas of our own processes of experiences. And this is in your 10th house of your career, of how people see you and bigger life stuff that, is at the top of the sky. And while this full moon's happening, during the Mercury-Venus conjunction, I think this is a really good time to look at what possibilities are out there and where you can really grow into something by focusing on the things that you do value right now and that you can see right now. And also having that clarity of where you need to center yourself, what's going on in your home life is going to give you more freedom with what is going on with your career, what is going on in the workplace, what is going on with how people see and address you. Then on September 14th, as Mercury is still conjoining Venus, well, it's now past, but they're simultaneously both going to ingress into Libra and move into your 5th house. Now, this is really exciting because Venus goes out of her sign of fall and into her domicile sign where Venus can do the most Venusian things possible. Venus has free reign. It's her home. And Venus is wanting to attract. Venus is wanting to connect. Venus is wanting to build bridges. Venus is wanting to beautify and indulge in what Venus likes to do and in those qualities. And it's just kind of interesting to talk about because Venus is moving from your 4th house to your 5th house. And that's pretty important because the 5th house is all about love, relationships, sex, children, creativity, passion, your arts, hobbies. And while Venus moves into her home sign here, I feel like this is going to be a really good time for you guys to get more acclimated to really connecting yourself again to the things that do bring you joy, maybe finding more romance, being with other people, pursuing hobbies and creative interests that, help you be yourself. And while Mercury also goes into Libra, this is where communicating and vocalizing those things is going to be a little bit more prominent and easier. I want to hit on the idea of that both of these planets are moving into Libra, so we are talking about balancing a little bit. Also on September 14th, we're going to be having Mars opposite Neptune. And now, while Mars is in your 4th house, it's wanting to, figure out what's going on. You may still have some problems and some stress in your home life, and Mars is wanting to, focus on the details and line all of its ducks up in a row. Mars opposing Neptune is kind of like being able to pierce through that veil a little bit more and kind of have a better understanding of where Mars needs to direct its energy and its attention to versus what is just cloudy and foggy and confusing and is, if you go in that direction, you just get overwhelmed. It's like Mars in Virgo needs to just rely on the facts, and Mars in Virgo needs to rely what's on paper and not necessarily, what could be. And as Mars opposes Neptune, I think this is going to be that moment where you guys are kind of like, all right, I understand that things don't always make sense and there's not a clear picture for the end of the road, but this is what I have for myself right now. So it's time to start initiating those things. Then on September 18th, we finally have Saturn stationing direct. Now, Saturn's been retrograde for the past few months, and during Saturn's retrograde is when we've been dealing with trials and tribulations, dealing with walls and blockages and being boxed into things. And as Saturn moves direct, this is when we take, the adversity that we went through and we take what we've learned from that and actually start applying it to our life and actually start, being more self-disciplined and having more structure and rules set for yourself. Now, Saturn is going direct in your 8th house, and the 8th house is a weird place. The 8th house is about, death. It is about, other people's money, what other people have. It's an aversion to the ascendant, so you don't see what's really going on there, just like you don't always see other people's money and what they have. The 8th house is about change and it's about transformation. And so as Saturn stations direct here, this is a really big time to really take on the responsibilities that have been handed to you here and kind of face them with a more mature aspect about this. And you got to take what lessons you've learned in the past few months while Saturn's been retrograde and actually apply it to real world situations. Then on September 21st, we finally have Jupiter squaring Neptune for the third and final time. This transit's been going on for the majority of the year, and the aspect I want to hit on with Jupiter is, as it was first went to Sagittarius, I've talked about this before, but when it went to Sagittarius, it went to your 7th house, it created all this room for the possibilities of relationships. Jupiter went retrograde, where it was kind of like, being philosophical about what that means, what it wants to grow into. But it's been squaring Neptune the whole time, where Neptune's kind of been like, it's been hard to hold that image of optimism and truth when you're in the face of confusion and duality and deception. Well, as Jupiter's now stationed direct and is moving forward, as it squares Neptune again, I really think that this is kind of like the truth prevailing over the deception. This is kind of like remaining strong in our faith, remaining strong in our beliefs that, something that could, or remaining positive about an outcome that can happen. And as Jupiter squares Neptune, this is a time to have a little bit more faith and be a little bit more excited and optimistic about the realm of relationships for you guys. Because as you know, Jupiter's in your 7th house of relationships, on one-on-one with people. And as it squares Neptune, yeah, sure, you may not see exactly where it's going to lead, but nothing's ever going to really hurt you by having a sense of optimism about it. Then on September 23rd is when the sun moves into Libra, and the main luminary and the light that gives us life here on planet Earth is now in your 5th house, focused on love, romance, creation, sex, children, arts, hobbies. The main focus here is on what you want to do. And while we have Venus here and Mercury here, there's a lot of attention being brought into this place. So it really comes back down to Gemini. What do you want to do? And then on September 25th, that's when we have Venus squaring Saturn. And I bring this up because this transit's usually pretty rough, but this one's a little bit interesting because we have Venus in her domicile sign, Saturn in her domicile sign, but Venus is in the superior position in this place, so Venus has a little bit more authority and control over the situation. And Venus in Libra is like, I want to connect myself and have more fun with the things that I enjoy, and I want to be able to have those experiences. Saturn in the 8th house is kind of like, nope, you can't. You have these obligations and duties to fulfill with other people. But Venus being in the superior position is, and I hit on balance a little bit earlier, because where do we need to balance what we want to do and what we enjoy with what our responsibilities are? Saturn's exalted sign is Libra. So Libra does deal with rules and regulations. So how can you really balance, spending time doing the things that you want to do, that you enjoy in your own romantic life or your own personal things, and also still balance out the responsibilities that you've been handed to? And then we end September on September 28th with the new moon in Libra. Well, we don't technically end September, you know what I mean. The new moon in Libra is basically the last thing that's going on in September. And this is, resetting our intentions, getting a little bit more level-headed. Both the luminaries are focused on one sign, and this is Libra, and this is your 5th house. So where can we find more balance and bring more attention to you being able to enjoy and express yourself in the ways that you do? But again, this full moon's going to be squaring Saturn. So this does have a lot to do with balancing out, not only what you want to do, but with what your prior obligations and responsibilities are. And that's how we're ending September. It's a big transition from, focus, focus, focus to balance, balance, balance. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. And I'll be seeing you next month.